Let me ask you something. What do you think goes through the mind of a man who thinks he can bend the world to his will? A man who looks at one of the most volatile regions on earth and says, I can fix this. Today we're stepping inside the mindset of President Donald Trump, not to defend him, not to condemn him, but to understand him. Because when war is on the table, understanding motivation is very important. Welcome back to Sometimes and Forever with me, Denny Downing. And yes, today we are asking, what could possibly be the thinking of one of the most powerful persons on earth? What was his motivation for starting a war with Iran? Now, to be clear, I don't know President Donald Trump. I have never met him. And in truth, even if I knew him, I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly what he was thinking in his own mind. Because we are not mind readers, but we can look at a person's actions and their decisions and come to fairly good conclusions about what may be going through their minds. So based on the president's actions, I'm going to posit 3 possible things he could be thinking that may have led him to start this war with Iran. So here we go. Possibility number 1 is that he may be very sincere. We're going to start with this, what I think is perhaps the most generous interpretation. President Trump genuinely believes he is doing the right thing. If you listen to his own words, that's exactly how he frames it. He says, the goal is to defend the American people and eliminate threats from Iran, particularly nuclear weapons and regional instability. From that perspective, this isn't about ego. It's about prevention. It's about stopping a future catastrophe before it even begins. And historically, leaders often justify wars this way. They usually state that they have to go to war to stop a threat before it gets out of hand. Think about it. Wars are never sold as personal ambition. They're sold as a necessity. They're sold as something that must be done for the greater good. Even now, U.S. officials have argued that Iran's missile programs and regional influence pose a long-term danger that must be addressed early. So, in President Trump's mind, he may genuinely believe, if I don't act now, something worse will happen later. And here's the thing that we all need to bear in mind. There is some logic to that. Because if you look at this war with Iran, Iran has been engaging in what analysts call an escalate to de-escalate strategy. So what they have been doing is that they have been targeting the infrastructure of neighboring countries, particularly those countries that are allied to the United States. They have been bombing the U.S. bases in the Middle East, and this is to force pressure on the United States to back off. So from this viewpoint, President Trump isn't being reckless. He's preemptive. He sees himself as the man stepping in where others hesitated. Perhaps he sees himself in the role of a protector, a disruptor, and we have seen his behavior. We see that he's not somebody who follows the rules. He's not somebody who goes by the script. He is a disruptor in some ways. And perhaps he sees himself also as the only one who is willing to act. But like I said, I'm not in his head, and this may not be the full story. So what if this isn't about belief? It's not what he believes, but instead it's about influence. It's about being influenced by others. Well, that leads us to our second possibility, that he may be influenced by those around him. It's very obvious that President Trump didn't arrive at this decision all by himself. He didn't wake up one morning and say, well, hell, it's time for me to attack Iran. He must have had meetings and numerous consultations about this war and what it would look like, what it would mean. Clearly, ultimately, the final decision was his to make, but we have to ask, was he gently pushed toward this decision, or was he strongly pushed by those around him, those who have their own agendas? I'm putting forth this argument because when you look closely at how this war began, the story gets a little messy. Different reasons were given by different people for the conflict. We were told that the war was launched in order to stop an immediate Iranian threat. It was also said that it was because Israel was about to strike Iran, so the US had to strike first. Long-term strategic goals were pointed to as a reason. Some officials went so far as to call it a holy war. And when explanations keep changing, it suggests that there's more than one motivation for the war. In fact, there isn't even a clear motivation. There are many motivations here, and not all of them belong to the president. Even recent reporting shows shifting goals and timelines throughout the war, ranging from regime change to negotiation to total surrender. That kind of inconsistency doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't just happen just like that. It can mean that there are competing voices behind the scenes. In other words, there are too many cooks making this broth. And we need to just be honest here. The truth is that war is never just about achieving ideals. As much as we like to think that they are, they're not. Wars are usually about power, they're about influence, and always about money. So in this theory, in this thinking that I'm positing here, President Trump isn't the sole architect of this war. He is the face of a much larger machine. And that sometimes is the hard part of being a leader, I believe, because you're the one that everyone can finger and say, he did it, it was his decision. They never see the others behind you. They never see those who had a hand in how things are going down. The truth is, though, that even though you might be the one who gets all the blame if things go wrong, the converse is true, because you could be the one who gets all the praise if things go right. But there's a third possibility that we need to consider. And this one, I believe, is the most human of them all. This is a possibility that all of us can identify with, I think. What do you think? Here it is. It's a possibility that President Trump wants to win history. What do I mean by that? Think about it. Who does not want to leave a strong legacy behind? Who doesn't want to go down in history as the person who made things happen? If there's one thing we know about President Donald Trump, is that he thinks in terms of winning. Not just winning elections, but winning history. So there's strong evidence that President Trump wants a decisive outcome to this war. He wants to get that moment where Iran is forced into submission. He has used language like unconditional surrender and push for outcomes that look less like negotiations and more like victory. Because if he gets this, he is the one who is going to be remembered as the person who did what others couldn't do. Some analysts have even argued that his goals are political rather than purely military, and that he wants Iran to cry uncle. As a matter of fact, President Trump himself said that he wants them to cry uncle. It's a term he used when he was talking to some reporters recently. And this is important. Why is this important? Because this isn't about war strategy or ideals anymore. It's about storytelling. And what is the story? The story is, who will history remember as the man who finally dealt with Iran? Every president of the United States since the Islamic Revolution in 1979 tried and failed to deal with Iran. And tensions have been simmering between the two nations ever since. So imagine the appeal of being the one who finishes the job, the one who does what others couldn't. But this way lies danger. When legacy becomes the goal, escalation becomes tempting. And we're already seeing signs of that. There are reports of potential plans for what is called a final blow, a decisive military action meant to force Iran into submission. At the same time, President Trump has floated peace plans and claimed the war could end soon. And this is even as military forces build up with ground forces on the way to Iran. There's a contradiction here. Do you see it? There's a contradiction because on one hand, he's saying he wants peace and he's saying that the war could end very soon. And on the other hand, They're sending in troops that will escalate this conflict. That contradiction tells us something important. At least it tells me something important. It tells me that President Trump wants both. He wants, on the one hand, to be seen as the peacemaker, and on the other hand, he wants the reality of being the victor, the one to vanquish those pesky Iranians. I think he's going to have a hard time having that cake and eating it too. So what is President Trump really thinking? Is he sincere? Is he being influenced by others? Or is he chasing history? The truth is, it might be all three. Leaders are rarely driven by just one thing. They are driven by belief. They take office, obviously, they take office believing that they can make a difference. But soon they are shaped by pressures from those around them, people who have their own opinions, agendas, and things that they want to accomplish. When you add to that the pull of dreams of their own legacy, when all of those forces collide, the consequences aren't theoretical anymore. They are real. They are global. So here we have a potent mix of perhaps President Trump's own personal beliefs of what should be done, what can be done, what he wants to accomplish. Then we add to that the ideas, desires of those around him, their own personal agendas. And we add to that also, we're going to put into that equation President Trump's own desire for his legacy. How does he want to be remembered? When those forces collide, the consequences aren't something that you're going to read about in a textbook. It's not theory. It's real. And these real consequences affect people's lives in very substantial ways. And they're not just affecting people in the United States or Iran, the two countries that are at war. We'll talk about Israel another time, but they're not affecting just the two countries that are at war. They are affecting every country in the world. We're seeing how the markets responded when the president came out and said he was calling a 5-day ceasefire to the war. Just a word and the oil prices went down. His power and their consequences are real. At this point, maybe the better question we should be asking is not what President Trump is thinking, but rather what happens when one person's thinking shapes the fate of millions? And how much control do we really have over our lives? I would love to hear from you. What is your opinion? What do you think President Trump is really thinking? And how much control do you think you have over your own personal life? Until next time, this has been Sometimes and Forever with me, Danny Dowding. Thank you so much for listening.